Understanding generational trauma in marginalized communities, healing through awareness. Explore how generational trauma shapes marginalized communities and discover pathways to healing inherited wounds from the past. Why generational trauma hits marginalized communities harder than you might think. You know, I was chatting with a friend the other day about something that doesn't get talked about enough. How trauma doesn't just live in one lifetime, but can actually be passed down through generations. Especially in marginalized communities, this inherited trauma creates ripples that last way beyond individual experiences. So here's the thing. When we talk about family trauma or even ancestral trauma, we're really looking at how pain, stress, and hardship get woven into the fabric of a family's history, shaping behaviors and responses without people even fully realizing it. It's like an emotional legacy that's coded into how people relate to the world and to each other. This isn't just about remembering sad stories from the past. It's about how events like systemic racism, poverty, forced displacement, or cultural erasure don't just affect the people who lived through them, but can influence the health and well-being of generations that come after. That's why you hear terms like intergenerational trauma, transgenerational trauma, and multi-generational trauma thrown around. They all try to describe the same phenomenon, trauma passed down like a family heirloom, but a really heavy one. Think about a family whose ancestors faced slavery, segregation, or mass incarceration. The immediate generation that experienced that trauma might have developed coping mechanisms, some healthy, some not so much. Then their kids, and their grandkids, inherit not only the genetic material, but these deeply rooted emotional scars. Things like heightened anxiety, difficulties trusting others, or struggles with self-worth aren't just psychological, they're tied to this bigger context. One of the reasons this happens is because our bodies and brains can physically store those traumatic responses. That's why you might see patterns of behavior repeating generation after generation, even when the direct source of trauma is no longer present. It's an emotional DNA, shaped by history. And here's where marginalized communities face something extra tough: ongoing societal pressures. While past generations may have carried scars from specific traumatic events, current realities of discrimination, economic inequality, and limited access to resources can reopen those wounds again and again, making healing much more complicated. What also fascinates me is how these patterns affect family dynamics, how family trauma cycles through households. For example, a parent who grew up in an environment where trust was broken repeatedly may struggle with attachment in their own family, and their children might grow up experiencing emotional neglect or instability without even realizing it's part of this bigger inherited trauma. This is why more people are turning to research and therapeutic approaches focused on this concept. Understanding these layers can help break unhealthy cycles and offer pathways toward healing. One resource that's been making waves in this space is a book called The Generational Algorithm. It explores how rewriting emotional patterns passed through families can transform not just individual lives, but entire family lines. If you're curious about how this works and want some tools to start recognizing and addressing these inherited wounds, I highly recommend checking it out. You can buy now on Amazon and get a clearer idea of how to approach this sensitive but powerful topic. Ultimately, acknowledging multi-generational trauma in marginalized communities is about honoring the resilience that people have shown while also creating space for real healing. It's not about blaming the past, but understanding it in a way that empowers change for future generations. Pretty incredible when you think about it, right? So, next time you hear about family or inherited trauma, remember there's a whole history beneath those experiences. And it's not just personal, it's collective. And that collective awareness might just be the key to breaking the cycle.